Hello to Edward, the chair of the IOSH Railway Group. Thank you for joining us to provide your valuable insights about the rail industry. This quickfire interview is for those who are just starting out in their safety and health careers, or maybe looking for a career change. Myself, Sam, and Ellis, who are members of the IOSH Future Leaders Community Steering Group, will now ask you a few questions to provide that insight. So we'll start by getting to know you. Can you tell us a little about yourself, including how you became involved in the rail industry?
Yes, certainly. I had a military career originally. I came from a military background, and towards the end of it, I was getting more and more drifting into different aspects, such as fire safety. So when I left, this led into my introduction to health and safety following the NEBOSH certificate. My enthusiasm never waned, and I then went into a full-time 3-year degree in occupational health and safety management. At the time, I was continuing after my military career in the reserve forces, where I was advising on health and safety and finance. So I had 7 years in the reserve forces continuing, while at the same time, I then started my career in food manufacturing in health and safety. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I left and I moved into law, which was a really interesting career move. So I was advising lawyers on health and safety matters in relation to possible prosecutions and advising their clients on compliance with health and safety. During this time, I started my master's degree in health and safety law. Sometimes later, there was a financial crash that unfortunately led to a career change, which turned out to be very fortunate. And this led to my introduction into rail with what is now known as DB Cargo and the biggest rail freight operator in the UK. So when I joined there, it was quite a surprise and quite a difference from all my normal health and safety. There are lots of similarities, but I was taken in as the head of assurance and assurance manager, and then moving on to head of compliance and audit in the this national rail industry. There are different issues to passengers, such as dealing with things that freight deal with, such as construction, noise, road vehicles, asbestos, fatigue, collisions, the maintenance of hundreds of rail vehicles and wagons that you may often see being covered in graffiti. So it was a very good introduction, but I was supported by some very good professional health and safety people, members of IOSH included.
Thanks, Edward. It's very varied past experience that you've got there. What opportunities are available for new and aspiring OSH professionals in the railway industry?
Well, as I mentioned, I gained my experience in the freight industry, but there are many groups where I expended my knowledge, such as there's a National Freight Safety Group, the Rail Safety Standards Board, the Office and Road of Rail, and the Rail Delivery Group, which covers the passenger side. And because the industry I was in had a limited passenger involvement, I could join that side as well. So I was getting the experience from all around. But there are numerous opportunities in the industry. There really are opportunities from regulatory with the regulator, which is the Office and Road and Rail, as opposed to the HSE, which many people will be familiar with. So the regulatory side is inspectors. Accident investigation, where the former chief inspector, who's just recently retired, Simon French, OBE, is a chartered member of IOSH. And he led some extremely serious investigations. And again, as members of the industry, we were invited to those after the accidents, and they explained how it worked, how their investigations worked to get to the causes. There's operational safety in freight, heritage, infrastructure such as Network Rail. So the operational safety goes all the way across, from the train that you see at the station to the construction traffic that builds the rail industry. So it's, even now we're talking about something that I'd never even have thought of, is cyber safety, where we have an industry that is based on technology, and cyber is a risk that we have to contend with. And there's some really interesting people and engineers who have introduced health and safety in cyber and the consequences. So it really is a varied industry. And there's also other organizations. There's, for example, the Chartered Institute of Rail Operators, who looks at all aspects, but I'm a member of that as well. So I can build up my background knowledge to the industry rather than just focusing on health and safety.
Thank you. That's a brilliant answer. Being new to rail myself, it always surprises me just how many opportunities there are, and it's just ever expanding, as you've touched upon.
I think that is the case, and it really surprised me. It really did surprise just how wide. I never expected to be involved in the ballast dust working group in the rail industry, because it's something you just don't consider at the time, but it was a big issue and continues to be in occupational health.
Certainly, and you've touched upon my next question very well there. So what safety areas or issues would an OSH professional look to see or gain experience on in the industry?
I think that you're right, that is an opportune area, because it's something you probably wouldn't think about. Most of this work goes on at night, it goes on at weekends, but those people you see in orange suits by the side of the track do have things like vibration to working with tools. They have the ballast being loaded, unloaded, and in hot weather it can be really very dusty, and there's the possible risk of silicosis and silica in the dust. So there are lots of issues, but one of the things I would mention is there's a thing called personal track safety, and it's the very basic introduction that all members of the industry get when they move into safety. And you pass this personal track safety. It tells you all about the how far you need to be from the track, all the safety that you need to keep yourself basically safe on the railway. So that's a really interesting point. And from that, you learn how to keep safe when you then come to deal with the other aspects, such as I mentioned dust, but noise is a big issue, believe it or not. Certainly in the freight industry, where the trains are quite old, quite noisy, they're towing tons and tons of heavy metal, heavy materials. So noise can be an issue. Surprisingly, what many will not be familiar with is road vehicles. The amount of road vehicles involved supporting the industry means that the issues around road safety are as critical as the rail safety. One of the things that we are saying goodbye to, fortunately, is asbestos, like the rest of the industry, but some of the old locomotives did have asbestos in that had to be removed, and it was a serious issue at the time. Luckily, that is going into the background. Fatigue is an issue. Many people are having to travel long distances to get to work on the railway. And again, my experience does come from freight work, freight train drivers working overnight, long hours, isolated in the dark. So fatigue can be an issue, and there are lots of systems in place to prevent that, and also prevent things like collisions and signals being passed at danger. The other thing that probably, again, the maintenance of rail vehicles is quite important. It's critical. If we look at some of the accidents that do take place, the industry is one of the safest in the world for rail. But when you do have an accident, because of the implications and certainly if it was a passenger train, it is significant. Electrical safety, obviously for working around the train, around the tracks, you've got electricity, and certainly safe systems of work are critical for the people working on the tracks and on the trains. So that's a quick fire of some of the issues.
Thanks, Edward. It's interesting to have that overview. Not being in rail myself, I didn't realise it sort of encompassed quite as much as what it does. What has surprised you the most about being an OSH professional in the rail industry?
I think this is probably the easiest question I could answer, and it's the professionalism. I still work in law, and I still deal with all other industries, and it's easy to make a benchmark, but the standards are extremely high. The professionalism and in some ways, I think it comes working in a safety critical industry where the risks are, you don't normally need first aid if people being hit by train or being electrocuted. the risks can be high. So the professionalism is probably one of the most, I was really surprised coming from other industries to see just how professional it is. And that was probably one of the most impressive aspects when I came into it.
Thanks, Edward. You probably see me nodding along there. I've only been in the industry 2 years, and that always takes me back. So it's interesting to see someone that has such vast experience as yourself seeing that as well firsthand.
Well, it's easy now because, like I said, I still work in law as well. And even though I have dealt with some rail cases, the other industries are, I would say, in some cases behind. And this doesn't mean it's mainly the isolated areas that don't get the OSH cover all the time. The professional IOSH membership is critical, but there's lots of industries who don't have that support. And the accidents or incidents are quite evident from that I deal with. So
looking to the future, where do you see OSH in our industry, in the rail industry, heading over the next 3 years?
Well, that's a really interesting question, specifically for 2 reasons. I mentioned that my change when I left the freight industry was down to the coal industry literally closing overnight. So in a freight industry that had something like 60% reliant on coal, that was due to dissipate over a number of years, that literally went overnight, it really wiped out a huge part of the industry. And it was really quite a disappointing time. Conversely, we saw passenger growth, which was really significant at the time. And then we were hit with COVID. Now, fortunately on COVID, the freight and the side, the infrastructure actually increased. So there are surprises of what comes out of it. So there was 2 examples. We've got the environmental issues where we've seen, the environmental and climate change is having a severe impact on the rail, where we're getting tracks washed away and issues like that. So they were the sides that could have slowed the industry down. But conversely, we have examples such as HS2, which is the expansion of rail, the opening recently of the Jubilee line, and these are examples of significant investments in the industry. Together, you take this when we have the potential growth in the north and the new stations being built and new routes, even though some of the old routes being upgraded. This is, a significant part of the growth of the industry. So with that, there's a growth for IOSH and there's a growth for the health and safety professionals. And in all the different groups, whether it's freight, passenger, heritage, they all need a health and safety professional. So
thanks, Edward. And I know you touched upon a couple of sort of focus areas there, sort of, environmental issues, expansion of rail lines, growth in the north. My next question to you is, what are the focus areas for the Railway Group Committee over the next 12 months?
One of the things, I can give you a few that we're looking at, but one of the things has been a concern is track safety. One of our co-opted members has been working with the regulator and the industry following some serious accidents and fatalities on track safety. And this is one area that we thought really was a little bit behind the times. So again, when I mentioned before the safest industry, sometimes we can be very lucky as well. But when people are being killed on the track and the lessons are not being learned, that is quite a serious issue. So we've co-opted one member from Network Rail who's done a vast amount of work in reducing track working and then by conversely reducing this risk to people on the tracks. One of the things that we'd never really focused on, and I either fortunately or unfortunately had 2 experiences, is passenger safety, where we haven't really given it the focus on health and safety, but passenger safety where people are exposed to risk with cancellations, trains not running, being left alone. And certainly I've seen some examples where passengers have been put at risk. Not a lot, hasn't been, a great number, but when I've come across 2 or 3, it's made me think that there's questions to be asked to make sure passengers safe, whether it's from football and violence and staff being abused, or actually passengers being put at risk. So the passenger safety is one area that we'd like to focus on. And the third one is maintenance. So the maintenance of vehicles is critical to the safety of the railway. And, if one rail vehicle has a problem, the impact of that on others, if there's a derailment, is significant. So my colleague, Russell Keir, who's the vice chair, deals with vehicles. He's a vehicle specialist with the regulator. So we're looking and focusing on the maintenance and safety of vehicles and how that's done. One of my previous roles as head of audit and compliance was I would go out with an engineer and look at the maintenance, all the steps that were being followed to make sure the vehicles were being complied with. So those are probably the main focuses, because we just don't want to be complacent. We have a safe industry, but complacency has no place in that. So those are our focuses for the next. I can tell you what we have looked at as well recently was working with other groups in collaboration. So the freight, road freight, had an issue with bridge strikes on the railway, and that impacted on both industries. So we were looking at that together recently. We've worked together with the Rail Accident Investigation Board with their accident investigations, which are probably some of the best I've ever come across. And that helps us to learn lessons to our membership, to the wider railway family.
Thanks, Edward. It's great to hear about collaborations as well with other areas and industries. So that's really informative. So I just want to say thank you for your time today, Edward. It's been really useful, and I'm sure it will help inspire many new OSH professionals looking to enter the rail industry. There's a final slide after this interview, which will outline how you can get in contact with the IOSH Railway Group Committee and the IOSH Future Leaders Committee. So on behalf of us, I'd just like to say thank you again and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.